We build phylogenies based on similarities of ancestry, because the phylogeny is a guess at who is most closely evolutionarily related to who. So we want to make sure that phylogenetics are based on something called homologies. Homo meaning same, or that they came from a common ancestry. A lot of the time, organisms that are actually evolutionarily related to each other will look similar, and those characteristics are called homologies. They're also based on genetics, so a lot of the time we'll use physical characteristics and genetic similarities to verify that two organisms are in fact homologous. So an example of this would be the chimp and the human. One trait that we share is the opposable thumb. And this is a pretty easy one based on anatomy alone, but if you look at the genetic similarities between chimps and humans, we share 98% of our DNA. And so this is definitely a homology or a shared characteristic that would validate putting chimps and humans next to each other on a phylogenetic tree. A lot of the times we'll see organisms that live very far apart, but in similar habitats that will have similar body shapes. So these are both moles. This one's in Australia. This one is in Africa. So these are going to be very different. So even though these two moles look very similar, they're not very closely related. The Australian mole is actually a marsupial with a pouch, and the African mole is a eutherian mammal that uses a placenta. So these are completely different methods of reproduction and birth. But they live in a similar habitat. They both live underground, they both dig, they both live in the dark. So you can see kind of the same little torpedo-shaped body. They both have these big claws. They both have very small or reduced eyes. The African mole looks blind. A very stubby tail, if there's a tail at all. So they have a lot of morphological characteristics that make them look like they're closely related. But if you looked at the genetic similarities and some of the different traits, like the fact that this is a marsupial and this is going to use a placenta, these actually aren't very closely related. So these are called analogous. They happen from something called convergent evolution. So even though these live on different continents, they both live in a same environment, dark, underground, diggers, and so they're going to develop the similar traits because of natural selection. Their environments are similar, so the selection pressures on there are going to be similar, so they're going to lead to analogous traits that look similar but are not actually closely related. So when we make a phylogenetic tree, it's super important that we're basing it on homologies, not analogies. And a lot of the times we will use computer programs to compare the DNA segments of different organisms to help us distinguish if these are homologies, which is good for phylogenetic trees, or analogies, which is not good. Sometimes we'll find homeoplasies. So again, homeo means same. These are actually analogous. So a homeoplasia is an analogy, where we'll see a DNA sequence will kind of match up at a few points here. But you can see kind of generally most of these don't match. All of the blue parts don't match up. And so this sequence here, these 5 points that match up, are a coincidence. Because there's only 4 letters. They're bound to kind of match up at some point. So we use statistical tools to help us determine if the percentage of matching is actually due to being related or just random chance, coincidence.